They thought it was just another routine stop. A woman in a gray hoodie, harmless, ordinary, until the order came. Take her down. Fangs sank, blood spilled, and the street went silent. What no one knew was that she wasn't just anyone. She was the director of the Federal Security Agency. One wrong bite, and a whole city would rise. What happened next will shock you, break your heart, and then heal it with hope. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe no voice should be silenced, hit subscribe, because this story will stay with you forever. The night air in Houston's Fifth Ward carried the weight of December rain, though no water fell. The clouds hung low and suffocating, swollen like bruises, the sodium glow of broken street lamps painting long, sickly shadows across cracked sidewalks and boarded-up warehouses. The distant rumble of 18-wheelers on I-10 echoed through the neighborhood, like a drumbeat that never rested. Fifth Ward was a place that had seen better days, its brick facades worn, its alleys reeking of rust and gasoline, and its people long accustomed to keeping their heads down when the wrong patrol car rolled through. That night, a story began that would shake the entire city. Dr. Maya Turner walked slowly down Lyons Avenue, her hands gripping two flimsy grocery bags, their thin plastic straining from canned beans and a carton of milk. Maya was 42, her tall frame wrapped in a weathered gray hoodie, hood drawn against the chill. Her skin was deep and smooth, though shadows of fatigue traced her eyes. Her life had been marked by service first as a prosecutor in Washington, then as an intelligence officer, and now as the director of the Federal Security Agency, a position she held with quiet strength. Out here, in her old neighborhood where her mother still lived, nobody knew who she really was. To them, she was just another tired woman in a hoodie, returning from an evening with family. That anonymity comforted her. She liked walking unnoticed, unguarded, feeling the heartbeat of the community she had sworn to protect. Maya's childhood in Fifth Ward had been scarred by watching her father's small auto shop squeezed out by crooked inspectors and payoffs. That injustice had planted in her the seed of relentless resolve. People described her as compassionate but unyielding, a woman whose voice could cut glass when she confronted a lie, but who softened instantly at the sight of a frightened child. She moved like someone who carried not just her own burdens but the weight of countless others. Ahead, flashing red and blue lights splashed across the walls of a shuttered liquor store. A police cruiser idled with its headlights glaring, illuminating a young black man pressed against the hood. His name was Derek Johnson, a 20-year-old community college student who lived with his grandmother nearby. He was lean, with nervous energy in his eyes, wearing a thrift store jacket and carrying a battered backpack. Derek was known in the neighborhood for tutoring kids in math at the church basement, a gentle soul who had avoided trouble despite the violence around him. Yet here he was, hands trembling, pleading innocence to men who had already decided his guilt. Standing before him was Captain Roy Maddox, a man in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered with a neck as thick as a tree stump. His eyes were pale and cold, his jaw lined with the kind of arrogance born from years of unchecked authority. Maddox had commanded the River Unit, a specialized street task force, for nearly a decade. What began as a unit to fight gang activity had rotted into something darker: extortion, intimidation, brutality cloaked in badges. Maddox was feared in Fifth Ward, a name that made shopkeepers swallow hard and mothers clutch their children closer. He carried himself like a man untouchable, shielded by silence and a department that looked away. Flanking him were two younger officers, stone-faced, their hands resting on holstered weapons, as if Derek's trembling constituted mortal danger. Maddox's lips curled into a smirk as he repeated the same line Fifth Ward had heard too many times. "You fit the description." Behind Maddox, tethered by a taut black leash, stood a German shepherd. The dog was powerful, 8 years old, with a coat of black and tan that gleamed under the flashing lights. A faint scar traced along his right flank, a reminder of battles past. His left ear drooped slightly, a permanent bend from an old injury. His amber eyes burned with intelligence but also fatigue, as though he carried the burden of every command he'd ever been forced to obey. His name was Shadow. He had not always been called that. Years before, as a pup in K-9 training, his handlers had nicknamed him Rex, a name chosen from a roster stripped of meaning. But one night on patrol, after saving a wounded partner from bleeding out by standing guard over him in the dark, the surviving officer whispered through tears, "You were my shadow, boy. Never left me. never once. From that night on, the name stuck. To the officers, he was just a tool, but to those who saw his loyalty, Shadow was more than muscle. He was devotion incarnate. Shadow's story was tragic in its own way. Once trained with love and precision, he had been reassigned under Maddox, who saw dogs not as partners but as weapons. Commands became harsher, rewards scarcer, punishments crueler. Shadow obeyed because he was built to obey, but deep in his chest lingered the memory of that first bond, of being a guardian rather than an enforcer. As Maya approached the scene, her pulse quickened. She recognized Derek instantly. He had carried groceries for her mother once, smiling shyly, refusing the tip. "Please, sir, I just left my grandmother's house," Derek stammered, voice breaking. "I didn't do anything." Maya's jaw tightened. She had seen this too many times. Innocence swallowed by suspicion, dignity eroded by power. Her voice, calm but firm, cut through the night air. "Officers, the young man appears cooperative. There's no need for this." Maddox turned slowly, his smirk twisting into something darker. He saw just a woman in a hoodie, someone disposable, someone who didn't know the rules of his game. "Back up," he snapped, "or you'll be next." Maya kept her hands visible at her sides, steady as stone. "I'm asking you to de-escalate. He's not a threat." Maddox's pale eyes narrowed. With a flick of his wrist, he gave the order. "Rex, take her down." Shadow hesitated for a fraction of a second, his amber eyes flicking from Maya's calm stance to Maddox's cruel sneer. But conditioning won. He lunged, jaws closing on Maya's arm. Pain exploded, blood splattering across the pavement. Maya staggered but did not scream. The street froze in horror. A second-floor window creaked open. An elderly man leaned out, phone raised, recording. Across the street, porch lights flicked on one by one, and from behind a leaning utility pole, a small voice shrieked, "Stop!" 7-year-old Lily Parker stood clutching a worn teddy bear, her pajamas patterned with faded stars. Lily was small for her age, pale from asthma, with tangled blonde hair and eyes too old for her years. Her father had left when she was 2, and her mother worked nights at a diner. Lily had grown up watching the river unit terrorize her block, learning early to stay quiet. But tonight, the sight of Shadow's teeth sinking into Maya's arm tore a scream from her chest. She shook violently, tears streaming, the teddy bear pressed tight against her ribs. For once, the neighborhood could not look away. Doors opened, curtains twitched, cameras rose into the cold December air. Blood dripped onto the cracked pavement, mixing with the grime of a city that had long ignored its own wounds. And Shadow, even as his teeth clamped down, trembled. His ear flicked. His eyes met Maya's, steady, unflinching, filled not with fear, but something else. In that gaze, a buried memory stirred, of being a protector, not an attacker. For the first time in years, he hesitated, loosening his grip, a low growl escaping not at Maya, but at Maddox himself. The night in Houston had shifted. The street was alive with chaos now, Fifth Ward shaking under the weight of its own history. The cracked sidewalk where Maya Turner fell seemed to pulse with every scream, every cry, every digital ping of a phone going live. The neon from a broken liquor store sign buzzed overhead, flickering as though it too trembled at the violence unfolding beneath. Maya was on her knees, blood soaking the sleeve of her gray hoodie, dripping steadily onto the pavement like a drumbeat. Her tall frame, usually commanding, sagged forward under the pressure of Shadow's jaws, though her jaw remained tight, her face a mask of composure even in agony. She knew better than most that panic gave predators power. "Resisting, huh?" Maddox's voice boomed above the din, his pale eyes lit with cruel satisfaction. His heavy-set body loomed over Maya, the brim of his cap shadowing a grin that reeked of arrogance. Maddox was the kind of man who grew up learning that fear could be currency, that silence could be bought with bruises. His upbringing was whispered about among his peers. A father who'd worked the refineries, fists faster than words, and a mother who'd vanished one day without explanation. Maddox had taken those lessons to heart. Better to strike first, to keep others too afraid to ask questions. Derek Johnson's voice broke through, trembling with desperation. "She didn't do anything." The young student's eyes were wide, tears streaking his face, his wiry frame trembling against the hood of the police car where he was pinned. Years of tutoring kids in math hadn't prepared him for this moment, where knowledge meant nothing and survival was a plea swallowed by sirens. From across the street, a woman burst out from a sagging duplex, her hair tied hastily in a headscarf, a baby clutched to her chest. This was Tanya Brooks, 32, a single mother known in the block for cooking extra plates of gumbo for the kids who came home hungry from school. Her eyes blazed with a fire that life's hardships had only sharpened. "She's bleeding," Tanya shouted, shifting her baby on one hip. "Y'all gon' kill her." The baby, a girl no older than a year, began to cry, her small fists waving in the cold night air. Tanya's voice cut through the chaos like broken glass scraping across stone. Lily Parker, pajamas askew, blonde hair sticking to her tear-streaked cheeks, bolted from behind the utility pole before her mother could catch her. She was tiny, her teddy bear dragging against the ground, seams torn from years of clutching. "Stop hurting her," she screamed, voice raw, innocence burning into defiance. Her mother, Emily Parker, 34, thin from too many late-night shifts at a diner off Lockwood Drive, caught her around the waist and pulled her back. Emily's eyes carried the exhaustion of a woman stretched thin between survival and motherhood, yet the fire of protection glimmered there too. "Lily, no!" she cried, clutching her daughter tight, shielding her from the sight of teeth sinking into flesh. Phones lit up the night like fireflies. A man leaning out from a second-floor window. Mr. Clarence Hill, 71, a retired dock worker with a bad hip and sharper eyes than most, held his phone steady. He had lived through riots, layoffs, storms, and curfews, but he knew instinctively that this moment was different. His voice, low and gravelly, muttered to himself as he filmed, "The whole damn city gonna see this." Within minutes, hundreds of screens across Houston filled with his feed. The crowd thickened, neighbors drawn from porches, their breath clouding in the cool night air. The cacophony of sirens in the distance only heightened the sense that the block itself had been turned into a battlefield. Amid the noise, Shadow shifted. His fangs, sunk deep into Maya's flesh, quivered as his amber eyes darted back to Maddox. Something inside him flickered, a memory, or perhaps instinct. The scent of Maya's blood filled his nostrils, sharp and human, but so did something else. Her steady gaze. Maya wasn't thrashing like most. She wasn't trembling with the scent of fear. Instead, her eyes locked on him, calm, steady, refusing to surrender. In that moment, Shadow's training clashed with his nature. For years, Maddox had forced him to lunge, to bite, to terrorize. But long before Maddox, back in the early days of training, Shadow had been praised for staying, for protecting, for guarding with patience. He remembered being called Shadow by the officer whose life he had once saved, the man whispering through his pain, "You're my shadow boy, always with me." That memory rippled now as if awakened by Maya's refusal to cower. A low growl rumbled from Shadow's throat, not toward Maya but toward Maddox. His jaw loosened, blood dripping as his teeth withdrew. The crowd gasped. "He stopped," Tanya muttered, eyes wide, hugging her baby tighter. Maddox's face twisted in anger. "What are you doing?" he barked, jerking the leash violently. Shadow's body jerked with the motion, ears flattening against his head, torn between obedience and defiance. For a moment the dog simply stood there, hackles raised, lips curled not at Maya, but at the man who commanded him. Derek's voice broke again, louder this time, hope flickering through his fear. "He knows it's wrong. Even the dog knows." Maya, clutching her bleeding arm, used what strength she had to steady herself. Her voice, though raspy, carried like a bell. "This isn't justice. This is brutality. Everyone can see it." Cameras zoomed, catching her words. The neighborhood, which for years had whispered about Maddox's cruelty behind closed doors, now had proof playing out in real time. The crowd pressed closer, voices rising. "Let her go!" "That's enough. We see you, Maddox." The tension hung thick as the humid Houston night. Shadow shifted again, his body trembling with indecision, his amber eyes reflecting the confusion of a creature forced to live as a weapon, but remembering he was once a protector. And in that hesitation, the entire city seemed to hold its breath. The siren's wail cut through the Houston night as the ambulance sped down I-45 toward Memorial Hermann Hospital. Inside, the world was reduced to harsh fluorescent lights, the chemical tang of antiseptic, and the pounding of tires on the asphalt. Dr. Maya Turner lay on the stretcher, her gray hoodie darkened with blood, her lips pressed together in a thin line as she refused to show weakness. Her tall frame trembled slightly from blood loss. but her eyes remained steady, tracking every face in the cramped space. Two paramedics worked around her, each moving with the quick efficiency that came only from years of seeing the worst. One of them, Nurse Carla Jimenez, a woman in her mid-40s with warm brown skin and hair tucked neatly under a navy scrub cap, adjusted the oxygen mask hovering near Maya's face. Carla was a veteran of Houston's emergency scenes, hurricanes, pile-ups, shootings. She carried herself with calm authority, her almond-shaped eyes soft even when the world was cruel. But tonight there was a nervous quiver in her hands. Something about this patient felt different, heavier, like the air around her carried unspoken weight. Beside her, an EMT named Kyle Dorsey rifled quickly through Maya's bag to find identification. Kyle was young, barely 26, tall and lanky with sandy blonde hair that refused to stay slicked back, giving him a boyish, distracted look. He had joined EMS after losing his older brother in a refinery explosion 2 years earlier, determined never again to stand by helpless. Though compassionate, he often second-guessed himself, and his nervous energy filled the ambulance as he unzipped Maya's worn leather wallet. The lights inside flickered as the ambulance hit a bump. Kyle froze. His hand hovered over an ID card half slipped from its slot. The letters gleamed under the flashing red light. Director, Federal Security Agency, FSA. And the photo showed Maya with the same resolute gray eyes, but with a crisp suit and the kind of official composure that left no doubt of authority. For a long heartbeat, no one spoke. Carla leaned closer, squinting, then glanced up at Kyle, her voice dropping. "You're seeing this too, right?" Kyle swallowed hard, nodding. She's a director? Federal?" The words hung in the air like a weight pressing down on their chests. Carla instinctively looked down at Maya, and for the first time that night she saw not just a wounded woman, but a figure who had been carrying a world larger than this blood-stained hoodie revealed. Maya's lips curved slightly, a weary acknowledgement. She hadn't wanted this exposed here, not like this, but the truth was now laid bare. The driver, a stout man named Terrence Cole, late 50s, bald with a bristling gray mustache and a baritone voice that usually carried jokes to keep tension down, caught the words over the radio chatter. His hands stiffened on the wheel. "You telling me we've got a federal director back there bleeding out? Jesus Christ." Carla pressed her hand gently against Maya's arm. "Dr. Turner, Director Turner, we'll get you safe. I promise." Maya managed a faint smile. "Maya is fine. Titles won't help me right now." Her voice was firm but edged with fatigue. Within minutes, the news spread beyond the cramped ambulance. Kyle, shaken, had left his radio mic open by accident, and the chatter bled into the wider EMS frequency. By the time they reached the hospital's emergency bay, whispers had already trickled outward. A federal official, high-ranking, injured in Houston. Reporters listening to scanners scrambled. By dawn, the local TV crawl would flash. High-ranking federal official attacked in Houston. At Memorial Hermann, the emergency bay burst alive with activity. Nurses in scrubs lined up, rolling stretchers, while security personnel glanced nervously toward the doors. A night shift doctor, Dr. Priya Desai, an Indian-American woman in her late 30s, petite with sharp cheekbones and the weary eyes of someone halfway through a double shift, waited at the threshold. She had a reputation for decisiveness under pressure, forged during Hurricane Harvey when she led triage for dozens stranded in floodwaters. The gurney burst through the doors. Priya's eyes fell immediately on the bloodied arm, then flicked to the ID card Kyle still held awkwardly. Her face betrayed a flicker of recognition. "Oh, God," she whispered. Then louder to the team, "Get her to Trauma 2, now." As they rushed inside, the hallway lights seemed harsher, the tiled floors echoing with urgency. Orderlies cleared the way, their sneakers squeaking, while security radios crackled with sudden codes. Someone already leaked to a news crew waiting outside. The glow of camera lights pierced the hospital windows, restless like vultures circling. Meanwhile, across town, Captain Roy Maddox sat in the river unit's cramped station office, slouched back in a cracked leather chair. A stale cup of coffee sat untouched beside him, his pale eyes fixed on the muted television. The news chyron scrolled. High-ranking federal official attacked in Houston. The anchor's voice rose with dramatic urgency, though the details remained thin. Maddox's face drained of color, his jaw clenched, then relaxed into a smirk. Around him, a couple of younger officers shifted uneasily, their whispers blending with the hum of the old air conditioner. Maddox leaned forward, his heavy-set frame casting a long shadow across the desk. He spoke in a low, dismissive tone. "Just a rumor. Don't believe everything you hear." But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Years of enforcing fear, of twisting truth until silence became law, couldn't mask the ripple of panic crawling under his skin. If Maya Turner was truly who they said she was, then the bite, the blood, the live stream, it wasn't just another night in Fifth Ward. It was a fuse lit on a powder keg. The glow of red and blue lights washed over Memorial Hermann's concrete facade as the hospital became the unwilling epicenter of a city's outrage. By dawn, the sidewalks outside had filled with angry citizens, their chants echoing across the parking structures and traffic-snarled streets. If it can happen to her, it can happen to us. Cardboard signs, hastily painted through the night, waved above the crowd. Some bore Maya's name, others carried blunt indictments of corruption, and more still demanded justice for years of abuse swept under rugs. The hospital's private security had doubled overnight, their neon vests glowing under floodlights, but their presence only sharpened the tension. Houston's mayor, Angela Ruiz, arrived just after sunrise. Angela was a formidable woman in her early 50s, Cuban-American, with sharp cheekbones softened only by her tired, kind eyes. She wore her dark hair in a severe bun, her navy power suit still wrinkled from the emergency meeting she had rushed from. A lifelong public servant, Angela had built her reputation during Hurricane Harvey by refusing to abandon flooded neighborhoods when other leaders retreated to safety. But years in office had eroded her optimism, and the current scandal made her mouth tighten into a thin, brittle line. Standing before a wall of microphones with news helicopters buzzing overhead, she spoke with clipped clarity. Effective immediately, Captain Roy Maddox and the officers of the River Unit are suspended pending investigation. This city will not tolerate abuse of power. Her words were met with a cheer that rolled like thunder. Though her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear, she knew the fight was only beginning. Inside the hospital, Detective Ryan Cole climbed the sterile stairwell instead of taking the elevator. At 38, Ryan carried himself with the straight-backed posture of a man determined to hold on to integrity even when surrounded by decay. His sandy brown hair was kept short, though strands fell over his forehead during long nights. His jawline was square, softened by the faint shadow of stubble he rarely had time to shave. Ryan was known among colleagues as the one who wouldn't play ball, a label equal parts insult and badge of honor in a department where compromise often meant survival. His childhood in Galveston, marked by losing his fisherman father to a storm when rescue services arrived too late, had left him with a bone-deep hatred for systems that failed ordinary people. He paused at Maya's door, knocked softly, and entered. Maya sat upright in her hospital bed, pale but composed, her left arm wrapped in bandages, eyes sharp despite the fatigue shadowing them. A muted television in the corner showed live footage of the protests outside. Ryan pulled a chair close and spoke low. "Director Turner or Maya, I need to say something I should have said long ago. I've been stuck in that department for years, watching men like Maddox rot it from the inside. I told myself staying would let me protect people in small ways, but the truth is, I've been complicit by not speaking out." His hands flexed on his knees, his voice thick with frustration. "I'm done staying quiet. You exposed them by surviving, and I intend to back you up." Maya studied him for a long moment, her gaze weighing his sincerity. She saw not just another detective, but a man worn by the compromises of a broken system, still stubborn enough to resist being consumed by it. Her lips curved faintly. "Then we might just have a chance." Meanwhile, in the basement kennels of the River Unit precinct, Shadow lay behind chain-link fencing, amber eyes watching the fluorescent light flicker above. The 10-year-old German Shepherd was gaunt from years of service, black and tan fur dulled and scarred. His left ear bore a notch from an old training accident, and a faint scar stretched along his flank from a blade he had intercepted once. He had been raised under strict, punishing handlers, conditioned to obey, yet something in him had always resisted cruelty. That resistance had surfaced the night he stopped short of Maddox's command. Ryan arrived at the kennel later that evening. The officers tasked with processing Shadow for disposal lingered uncertainly, uneager to be the one to finish paperwork on an animal caught in the crossfire of scandal. Ryan knelt outside the cage, his pale gray eyes meeting the shepherd's steady amber ones. "You're not the villain here, boy," he murmured. Shadow's ears twitched, and he pressed closer to the gate. Ryan signed the release papers himself, overriding the order to terminate. As he clipped the leash and led Shadow out into the cool night air, the crowd outside the hospital caught sight of the pair. A ripple spread through them, voices rising not in anger, but in cheers. "The dog stays! He's not guilty!" someone shouted. For once, Shadow did not bare teeth or brace for commands barked with cruelty. He walked beside Ryan, head high, as if sensing that the leash no longer chained him to violence but tethered him to a chance at redemption. By nightfall, Houston was a city trembling at its seams. Protesters lit candles outside the hospital, their flames swaying in the wind like a vigil. In downtown bars and on front porches, conversations turned heated about police, about power, about whether change was finally possible. News anchors spoke of Houston in flames, not for literal fire, but for the burning anger and hope colliding in the streets. And high above it all, from her hospital window, Maya watched the city she had sworn to protect. The chants rolled upward, mixing with the hum of helicopters and the pulse of sirens. For the first time since blood stained the cracked sidewalk, she allowed herself to believe the city was waking. The neon sign above the diner flickered as though it, too, was exhausted by years of surviving the relentless Texas sun and highway storms. Evelyn's roadside grill had been serving truckers and night shift workers for 3 decades, its faded red booths patched with duct tape, its jukebox broken but still glowing faintly in the corner. The smell of burnt coffee and fried bacon clung to the air, and the hiss of the griddle was the only soundtrack until a battered door creaked open and Detective Ryan Cole stepped inside. Ryan scanned the room, shoulders tense under his leather jacket. At 38, he looked more worn than his age suggested, his jaw shadowed by a night's worth of stubble and his pale gray eyes restless, always searching. He chose a booth in the corner, one with a view of both the door and the parking lot outside, an old habit he had never broken. A waitress named Darlene shuffled over, her once bright blonde hair dulled by decades of cigarette smoke and double shifts. She set down a chipped mug and filled it without a word, her hands steady but her back stooped from years on her feet. Ryan gave her a quiet thanks and waited. Minutes later, Maya entered. She wore a plain gray hoodie over her hospital scrubs, her left arm still bound in thick white bandages beneath the fabric. The hoodie's sleeves hid the bruises on her wrists, but not the stiffness in her movements. Her face was pale, framed by dark curls pulled into a loose bun, and her sharp eyes scanned the diner with the same precision she once used in federal briefings. She slid into the booth opposite Ryan, her back straight despite the ache that flared in her ribs when she sat. Ryan leaned in, his voice low. "I know where Maddox hides his sins. Locker 12 at the Houston container port. Cash, body cams, maybe files they've been burying for years." He placed a napkin on the table, drew a rough map of the port with a ballpoint pen. "I've been hearing whispers from guys too scared to speak out loud. This is where they stash what they can't risk keeping in the precinct." Maya's eyes narrowed, her mind already calculating. Her role as director of the Federal Security Agency had once given her the power to dismantle operations like this from the top down. But now, wounded and stripped of authority by scandal, she was forced to orchestrate from the shadows. "We'll need more than whispers and guesses. Evidence that can't be denied. We can't let this slip. If Maddox realizes the locker's burned, he'll torch everything." At that moment, Shadow shifted under the table where he had been resting, his large frame half hidden in the shadows of the booth. The German Shepherd had grown more alert since leaving the kennel, as though sensing a new purpose. He sniffed the air, ears pricking forward, then pressed his nose against something near Ryan's boot. Ryan glanced down and saw it, a keyring lying half buried beneath the booth. He picked it up, the metal greasy with a faint slickness. The tag was marked HCP, Staff. Maya reached out, her bandaged fingers brushing the edge. She smelled it faintly and looked at Ryan. "Machine oil, dock machinery." Ryan turned the keychain over and froze. Scratched into the back was a faint number. 12. Shadow gave a low huff, tail thumping once against the cracked linoleum. Ryan's eyes met Maya's. "It's his. Maddox must have dropped it the night of the attack." Before Maya could answer, the diner's door opened again. A young mother in her late 20s entered, guiding a little girl by the hand. The child clutched a crumpled piece of paper. The mother, Sarah Holt, tall and thin with sunken cheeks and a tired grace that suggested years of quiet struggle, ordered takeout in a soft, polite voice. Her daughter, Lily, wandered toward the bulletin board near the counter where local flyers and faded photographs hung. She pressed her drawing against the corkboard and pinned it with a thumbtack, her tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Ryan and Maya both looked over. The drawing was crude, done with cheap crayons, but the message was unmistakable. a big dog with amber eyes standing guard over a woman with a bandaged arm. Above it, scrawled in uneven letters, "The dog saved her." Maya's throat tightened. She hadn't expected to be recognized outside the news headlines, certainly not by a child. Sarah noticed their gaze, gave a small, apologetic smile, and touched her daughter's shoulder. She insisted on drawing it, said the dog was a hero, thought it might help someone see hope. Sarah's voice carried a kind of quiet dignity, though the lines on her face hinted at hardship. She had been working 2 jobs since her husband left 3 years earlier, a fact that had worn her down but sharpened her resolve to raise her daughter with compassion intact. Maya managed a small smile back. "It does help," she said softly. Ryan looked at Shadow, who was watching Lily with calm intensity, tail sweeping the floor as if he understood the tribute. As Sarah and Lily left, Maya turned her focus back to Ryan. "The locker. We move carefully. If Maddox suspects, he'll bury us both before we ever get near it." She pushed the napkin mat back toward him. "You'll have to be my hands and legs on this one. I'll guide you from behind the curtain. But Ryan, don't underestimate him. Maddox has more friends than enemies in that department." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Then we'll use the one thing he can't control, the truth, and a dog that refuses to lie." Outside, the highway roared with the endless stream of trucks and cars, indifferent to the conspiracies unraveling beneath its overpasses. But inside that weathered diner, a fragile alliance solidified. A wounded director, a disillusioned detective, and a scarred dog had begun to chip away at the blue wall Maddox had built brick by brick. The Houston ship channel at night was a place of ghosts and echoes. Rain lashed against steel containers stacked like tombstones, and the brackish air smelled of rust, oil, and seawater. Sodium lamps burned weak halos into the mist, their yellow light pooling across puddles that mirrored the skeletal cranes looming above. It was the kind of night when even seagulls refused to circle, when the city's sins were swallowed by the rain. Detective Ryan Cole adjusted the brim of his soaked baseball cap and pulled his jacket tighter. Beside him padded Shadow, the German shepherd's fur slick with water, amber eyes gleaming in the half-light. Shadow moved with that cautious grace of a seasoned animal, nose twitching, ears pricked to the smallest creak of steel or splash of water. His frame carried the scars of service-faint marks along his flank, a notch in one ear, but tonight he seemed more soldier than pet. Ryan crouched behind a stack of rusted containers, listening to the rhythmic hum of the rain. He glanced down at Shadow, who pressed his nose to the ground and inhaled sharply. A low rumble left the dog's throat. Ryan whispered, "You got it, boy." The shepherd padded forward, leading Ryan to a battered metal locker tucked between crates. Painted numbers ran down its side, but one stood out clear even in the dim glow, 12. Ryan wiped the rain from his brow, pulled a set of lockpicks from his pocket, and worked quickly. The click of tumblers felt like a thunderclap in the silence. The locker swung open with a squeal of rusted hinges. Inside were bundles of cash wrapped in elastic, the kind of green that smelled like blood. On top lay a small black case. Ryan opened it to reveal an external hard drive and several SD cards, each carefully labeled with dates. Beneath them was a ledger written in hurried, blocky handwriting, filled with numbers and names. Ryan's stomach knotted. This wasn't just Maddox's slush fund. It was an entire network of dirty transactions, kickbacks, and blackmail payments, proof of years of rot. But before he could process it further, footsteps echoed across the dock. Heavy, deliberate. Ryan shoved the drive into his jacket, signaled for Shadow to stay low. From the mist emerged a man the size of a bulldozer Captain Maddox. His presence filled the space like a storm front, broad-shouldered, thick-necked, his face set in a perpetual scowl that made his deep-set eyes seem colder than the rain. His soaked trench coat flapped in the wind, and behind him came 2 men from the river unit. One was lanky, with a hawk-like nose and nervous hands. The other was thick in the middle, his belly straining against a bulletproof vest, a nightstick twirling casually in his grip. "Well, well," Maddox growled, voice like gravel dragged across steel. "Like a rat to cheese. I knew someone would sniff around Locker 12. Didn't think it'd be you, Cole." His eyes flicked to Shadow, who growled, teeth bared. "And the mutt. Fitting." Ryan barely had time to draw his sidearm before the larger of Maddox's men rushed him. The dock's slick surface betrayed his footing. Ryan slipped, his weapon skidding across the puddled ground. A boot slammed into his ribs, knocking the air out of his lungs. He hit the concrete hard, stars exploding across his vision. Shadow lunged with a feral snarl, clamping his jaws around the attacker's arm. The man screamed, trying to shake him off, but the shepherd's teeth dug deep. Maddox barked an order, and the second officer jammed a stun baton against Shadow's side. Electricity crackled. The shepherd yelped in pain, his body convulsing as he fell to the wet concrete. His growl turned into a ragged whimper. "Leave him," Ryan shouted, trying to push himself up, only to be slammed down again with another brutal kick. Blood filled his mouth, coppery and hot. Maddox crouched beside him, lips curling into a smile that carried no humor. "You should have stayed quiet, Cole. You think one honest badge can clean this city? You're nothing but a footnote." Ryan's hand twitched toward his pocket, where his phone buzzed faintly against his thigh. While Maddox's men were distracted, he pressed the emergency signal he'd prepared earlier. A faint chime confirmed it. Somewhere, in the sterile quiet of Memorial Hermann, Maya Alvarez's laptop lit up. Back in her hospital bed, Maya sat upright, ignoring the sting in her bandaged arm. She had rigged a secure link to Ryan's device earlier, her instincts refusing to leave him blind. The signal was weak, but alive. Her heart pounded as she activated a preloaded command, one that would ping federal servers, flagging Maddox's name and the coordinates of the dock. With a grim set to her jaw, she muttered, "You won't bury this, Maddox. Not tonight." Meanwhile, rain-soaked citizens had gathered beyond the perimeter fences. Word had spread online faster than fire, thanks to Sarah Holt's live-stream channel. The weary young mother, camera clutched in cold hands, spoke into her phone. "They tried to silence her. They tried to kill the truth, but we're here and we're not leaving. If it can happen to Maya, it can happen to us." Candles flickered in trembling hands, their flames weak but determined in the storm. The glow lit the puddles with soft halos, a fragile defiance against the steel and concrete around them. Children's voices could be heard singing softly, their words carrying eerily across the rain. Inside the fence, Ryan fought to stand, ribs screaming in protest. Shadow struggled beside him, legs shaky, fur bristling despite the shock still crackling in his muscles. Maddox lifted Ryan by the collar, eyes narrowing. "I'll finish this myself," he spat. But before the final blow could land, a new sound cut through the storm sirens, distant but approaching fast, growing louder with each second. Ryan's lips curled into a bloody smile. "Looks like you'll have company." Maddox snarled, releasing him, signaling his men to scatter. Shadow staggered to his feet, planting himself between Ryan and the retreating figures, growl returning low and guttural. Though his body trembled from the stun, his spirit had not broken. He was a soldier, standing guard even as the storm raged harder. The warehouse smelled of mildew and rust, its corrugated walls echoing every drip of rain from the broken roof. Shafts of pale light pushed through gaps in the metal siding, slicing the gloom into jagged stripes. Shadows shifted across rows of forgotten crates, casting the cavernous space in a half-lit unease. Detective Ryan Cole staggered inside, ribs aching, clothes soaked through from the storm. Shadow limped close at his side, his amber eyes still fierce despite the tremor in his muscles from the stun baton. But Ryan froze when he heard a sound that didn't belong, the frightened whimper of a child. His heart stopped. From behind a stack of crates stepped Captain Maddox, his massive hand gripping Lily by the collar of her red hoodie. Her small frame shook with terror, her brown eyes wide, fixed on Ryan. Behind them, Maya Alvarez stumbled into view, pale and gaunt, her hospital gown hastily hidden beneath a borrowed raincoat. Her bandaged arm pressed to her side, face tight with exhaustion. She had come to find Lily after leaving the hospital early, unaware she was walking straight into Maddox's den. Maddox's voice boomed through the cavern. "Drop your weapon, Cole, or the girl learns what it means to cross me." His pistol pressed against Lily's temple, his expression devoid of hesitation. Maddox was a man who thrived on fear, his thick frame looming like a wall of muscle and violence. The scar along his jaw deepened as he sneered. Ryan lifted his hand slowly, eyes flicking to Shadow. The shepherd crouched low, growl reverberating deep in his chest, but his body shook from earlier shocks. Ryan whispered, "Not yet, boy. Not yet." Maya's voice broke through, raw and trembling. "Please, Maddox. She's just a child. You've done enough." Her words came with the weary cadence of someone who had begged too many times in life and seen mercy denied. Maddox barked a harsh laugh. "Spare me." You think this is about her? This is about control. About showing them all that no candlelight vigil, no live stream, no bleeding heart crowd will ever strip me of what I built. At that moment, Lily squirmed, her small hands clutching the drawing still folded in her pocket, a crude crayon sketch of a dog saving a girl. It slipped from her grip, fluttering to the wet floor. Maddox's attention flickered downward just enough. Shadow lunged with every last ounce of strength left in him. The German Shepherd's teeth clamped onto Maddox's wrist, forcing the pistol free with a metallic clatter. The gun skidded across the floor, far out of reach. Maddox roared in pain, swinging his arm wildly, but Shadow held on until the captain slammed him against a crate. Shadow yelped but did not let go until Ryan surged forward. With a guttural shout, Ryan launched himself at Maddox, tackling him to the ground. The impact rattled through his already battered ribs, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. He locked his arms around Maddox's thick neck in a chokehold, Maddox thrashing like a bull. The struggle tore through the silence, crates toppling, dust clouding the air. Lily scrambled into Maya's arms, the woman collapsing around her daughter in desperate relief. She whispered over and over, "I've got you, baby. I've got you," her tears mixing with rain dripping from her hair. The echo of boots filled the warehouse. From the side entrance, federal agents in tactical gear stormed in, their shouts reverberating like thunder. Leading them was Special Agent Marcus Rourke, a tall African-American man in his early 40s. His close-cropped hair glistened under the flickering light, his face carved by long hours in the field. Rourke was known for his calm under fire, a reputation earned from years dismantling gangs along the border. His dark eyes swept the scene with surgical focus. "FBI, drop it now!" Ryan tightened his grip just as Maddox tried one last desperate surge. The captain's strength waned under the choke, and with a grunt, Ryan forced him flat against the concrete. Handcuffs clicked into place as federal hands took over, dragging Maddox up and away. His defiance had drained into hollow silence, his head lolling with defeat. The river unit officers who had trailed Maddox raised their weapons for a moment of resistance, but Shadow bared his teeth, growl vibrating through the warehouse. Then came another sound, the sharp command of a new voice. "Rex, stand down!" From the shadows emerged a woman in tactical uniform, Sergeant Elena Vargas. She was in her mid-30s, lean with an athlete's build, her long black braid damp from rain. A seasoned canine handler, Vargas carried herself with firm authority born of years training military dogs. She whistled once, then called again, her voice steady but commanding. From behind a crate padded Rex, a hulking sable-colored shepherd with a powerful frame and sharp ears. His eyes, dark and conflicted, flicked between the fleeing river unit officers and Vargas. "Rex, down," she ordered firmly, hand raised. For a heartbeat, the dog hesitated, muscles quivering with years of conditioning under Maddox's brutal training. But then something shifted the steady tone, the familiar cadence of a handler who gave commands without cruelty. Slowly, Rex lowered himself, chest to the ground, ears flattening. His growl ebbed away into silence. Vargas knelt, offering her palm, whispering praise. Rex stayed down, no longer a weapon in Maddox's arsenal, but a dog uncertain of his future. The agents swarmed, pinning down Maddox's men, collecting weapons and evidence. Rourke stepped to Ryan, offering a hand to lift him up. "Hell of a job keeping him busy, Detective. You're lucky that dog of yours doesn't know when to quit." He crouched, giving Shadow a quick scratch behind the ear. The shepherd's tail thumped weakly, his chest heaving, but his eyes stayed locked on Ryan as if waiting for approval. Maya clutched Lily, both shaking, both alive. Sarah Holt, the young mother live streamer, had slipped into the warehouse with the crowd outside. Her soaked hair plastered to her face, she filmed the arrest with trembling hands. Tears streaked her cheeks, though whether from rain or relief, no one could say. Into the camera, she whispered, "They can't bury the truth anymore. The wall broke tonight." For the first time in weeks, Ryan felt a weight lift. The storm still roared outside, but inside the warehouse there was a fragile sense of light, the kind that came not from lamps, but from justice clawing its way into the open. Shadow limped to his side and pressed against him, warm despite the rain. Ryan knelt, pulling the shepherd close, his voice low but steady. "You did good, partner. You did damn good." The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the small wooden church in Houston's Fifth Ward, turning the simple sanctuary into a prism of color. Reds, blues, and golds spilled across the old pews and the faces of those who filled them. The church, once worn and nearly forgotten, had become the place where a broken community gathered to breathe together again. The wooden beams creaked softly under the weight of history, but today, that history carried a sense of healing. Children sat beside their mothers and fathers, elders clasped hands with neighbors they had once distrusted, and the air carried not silence, but the low murmur of hope. The storm of Maddox's empire had ended. His trial, held in the district courthouse just 2 weeks prior, had been broadcast across the city. He had sat at the defense table like a cornered animal, his once imposing frame slouched, eyes darting without his usual fire. Witness after witness spoke of his crime's victims, former officers, even members of his own unit who had broken under oath. The judge, a stern woman in her late 50s named Judith Ramirez, had looked directly into Maddox's eyes when she delivered the sentence: 30 years in federal prison without parole. His accomplices received equally heavy terms. For the first time in decades, the River Unit was gone. The fallout rippled through Houston. City leaders could not ignore the anger that had poured into the streets after the arrests. In response, reforms were passed with a speed that astonished even the most jaded activists. Every patrol officer would wear a body camera, no exceptions. A civilian oversight council, made up of residents from every ward, was granted authority to investigate misconduct. And for the K-9 program, reforms struck at the very core. No longer would dogs be trained through fear or cruelty. A new humane program was launched, guided by experts in animal behavior, ensuring the next generation of working dogs would serve with loyalty born of trust, not pain. Outside the courthouse steps on the day of sentencing, a new announcement had been made. With donations gathered from across the city and some from beyond state lines, the Shadow and Lily Foundation was born. Its mission was twofold: scholarships for children in struggling neighborhoods and community outreach to strengthen trust between law enforcement and families. At the press conference, Ryan had stood beside Maya and Lily, Shadow at their feet, cameras flashing as they unveiled the name. The German Shepherd had leaned gently against Lily's legs, her hand buried in his thick fur, and the crowd had erupted in applause. Now, inside the Fifth Ward Church, the Foundation's birth was celebrated in full. Ryan Cole, wearing a crisp gray suit for the first time in years, stood near the altar with the poise of a man who had seen war and corruption but chosen to keep fighting. His once rough edges had softened, though his square jaw and quiet gray eyes still spoke of vigilance. The badge at his belt gleamed differently now. He had been promoted to lead the newly created Integrity Unit, a task force designed not for raids but for accountability. It was his job to make sure corruption never rooted itself again in Houston's soil. Shadow lay calmly at Ryan's feet, his dark coat brushed to a sheen, the faint scar along his side only a reminder of survival. He was no longer just a K-9. Maya had formally adopted him, and he now worked as a therapy dog for children who had endured violence. Twice a week, she brought him to hospitals and schools, where kids would bury their faces in his fur and feel safe for the first time in months. Shadow, though once trained as a weapon, had become a source of healing. Maya herself stood at the pulpit, slender in her navy dress, her dark hair pinned back. She looked stronger than she had the night she stumbled into the warehouse. She had found her voice again, not just for her daughter, but for a community that had seen women like her silenced too often. When she spoke, her voice carried steady across the pews. "They used a dog to silence me, but that dog brought us to justice." The words struck like a bell. The congregation rose to their feet, applause breaking into a standing ovation. Some shouted, "Amen," others wept openly, and the stained glass light wrapped the moment in brilliance. Sarah Holt, the young live streamer who had helped spark the movement, sat near the front row, her tall and slender frame trembling with emotion. Her pale face, framed by damp auburn hair, bore the strain of someone who had once been dismissed as a nuisance with a camera. But Sarah knew now her persistence had mattered. She clutched her phone, not to film, but to hold on to as if it were proof that her voice had value. In the pews, Special Agent Marcus Rourke leaned back, his broad shoulders finally at ease, his dark eyes softer than anyone had seen during the raid. Next to him, Sergeant Elena Vargas, dressed not in tactical gear but in a modest blouse and slacks, smiled faintly. Rex, the once feared shepherd, sat quietly by her side, a leash loosely held in her hand. Rex's posture was calm, his eyes no longer wild but focused on Vargas with trust. He had been retrained, not as an attacker but as a service dog for veterans coping with PTSD. His new beginning mirrored the city's. Children from the ward, some clutching small paper programs, others fidgeting with excitement, lined up to place candles at the altar in honor of those who had suffered under Maddox's reign. Lily, in a bright red dress, walked hand in hand with her mother, placing the final candle. When it was lit, the church glowed brighter than its simple structure had ever known. Ryan stepped to the front after Maya's speech. He did not speak long, only enough to remind the crowd that justice was not a single event, but a path. "We've seen what happens when power goes unchecked," he said, his voice steady. "But we've also seen what happens when a city refuses to stay silent. The integrity unit is yours as much as mine, and together we'll make sure the darkness never takes hold again." The crowd responded not with cheers, but with solemn nods and quiet claps. It was the kind of agreement born of hard lessons, not easy victories. Outside, the storm clouds that had lingered over the city for weeks had finally broken, leaving the sky a sharp blue. As the service ended, sunlight spilled fuller through the stained glass, splashing colors onto the wooden floor. The people of Houston spilled out of the church into the street, their voices blending with laughter and conversation, not anger. Ryan walked beside Maya and Lily, shadow padding faithfully at their heels. For the first time in years, Fifth Ward felt less like a scar and more like a promise. At the end of this story, one lesson shines brighter than all the pain that came before it. Even in the darkest corners, light can break through. What was meant for destruction turned into healing, and what was meant to silence became the very voice of justice. Some will call it courage, others resilience, but many of us know it was also a miracle. A reminder that God does not abandon the broken, and that His hand can turn even tragedy into testimony. In our everyday lives, we may not face Maddox or stand in courtrooms, but we do face struggles, loss, and the temptation to believe we are alone. This story shows us we never are. Faith, kindness, and the courage to act can change the world around us, even if it begins with just one step. If this touched your heart, I invite you to share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, tell us what you believe. And if you believe that God still works miracles, type amen in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and may the Lord bless you and your family with strength, protection, and peace.